So before we get started on this week's Herb of the Week, I want to give credit to Alexander Klink, whose background picture for this week's Herb of the Week is the photographer. And I found this on Wikimedia Commons. He's got quite a few pictures, so I recommend checking him out. But I want to thank him for sharing this incredible image. So, welcome to the Herb of the Week with me, your host and instructor for the online botanical medicine study course. And my name is Stephanie Georgiev. And I want to thank all of you who like, subscribe, and share and comment on the channel. And I want to welcome all new subscribers. At the time of the posting of this video, it is smack dab in the middle of Cancer Control Month, and we will continue to explore certain botanical medicines that have both historical and modern use in terms of either prevention or management of cancer. Now, a little bit of a digression before we get started. When I was in naturopathic school, which was ever so long ago, in many ways, it was the Wild West in terms of treatment modalities. And this was before the internet and also before much of the information sharing was going on. It was all sort of almost like the illicit drug trade, to be perfectly honest with you. It was really interesting where you would get your information. And especially in the United States, which at the time was very conservative and orthodox in terms of using or researching anything other than pharmaceuticals and basic nutrition. Now, thankfully, so much more is known in terms of sound scientific research, along with an openness to explore things like herbs and supplements. So way back when, the big counterculture cancer treatment was Essiac tea. Now, Essiac is a formula which was created by a Canadian nurse, Renee Cassé. I'm sure I'm not saying her name properly, so apologies. And according to best estimates in 1920, and you can see her little picture on the bottle from the Canadian company. And it was about 1920 that this kind of burst onto the scene. Now, the formula may have been given to her by an Ontario Ojibwa medicine man, but this has never been corroborated. It's never been proven. We don't know who this person was, but it's an amazing formula. And the formula has been reproduced by various herbal companies, but the Essiac Canadian International is the most reputable source for the remedy. And it's made up of 4 herbs, and we'll be exploring one of them as it is a traditional Chinese herb that I'm very familiar with. And there's lots of research on this herb and thousands of years of use behind it. Now, personally, I have never used Essiac tea in my own health or prescribed it for my patients. And thankfully, I'm not struggling with cancer, and I just never used it. And I didn't have anything against it, but I just never used it with my patients. So I'm not promoting or dissing it. I'm just saying that I have no personal use with this combination. But I can report on aspects of this historical remedy, one of the herbs, that many people attribute various benefits. So for this week's Herb of the Week, we will be exploring one of the herbs in the traditional Essiac formula, which is called Rhubarb palmatum, which is also known as Turkey rhubarb or Chinese rhubarb. And the pinyin for this herb, which is what I'll mostly be calling it because that's my way of relating to this plant, it's called da Huang. Now, Rhubarb palmatum or da Huang is an herbaceous perennial plant from the Polygonaceae family of flowering plants, informally known as knotweed family or the buckwheat family. And it has, as you can tell from Alexander Klink's photo, it has 2-foot wide leaves that are deeply lobed. Okay, I think they're really pretty. And the plant grows for a few years before shooting a summer flowering stalk. And you can see that in the botanical drawing. This stalk can get up to 6 feet high, and the flowers can be either white or pink. And it's native in the regions of Western China, northern Tibet, and the Mongolian Plateau. And currently it's growing in Qinghai and Gansu provinces of China. And it's produced commercially mainly in the Sichuan province of China. And Da Huang is found in high altitudes from 4 to 13,000 feet, and it's also grown in North America. The dried roots of the Chinese rhubarb, or Da Huang, became one of the most prominent items traded along the Silk Road. And when we get into more of what this herb does, it's kind of telling and a little amusing that this was such a prominently traded item. And imported roots of various rhubarb species were widely used in Europe for hundreds of years before this particular plant was identified. Now, the root is the part of the plant that is medicinal. And when it's 6 to 10 years old, not 16, 6 to 10 years old, the rhizomes of these plants are removed from the ground, and they're removed in autumn when both the stems and the leaves change to yellow. And the root is sliced and dried for use and remedies. Now, traditionally, and this, I can tell you, this herb is used a lot in different formulas. It's what the Chinese would call a very popular herb. And there's the characters for it, and it's considered bitter and cold. It enters the large intestine, spleen, stomach, liver, and heart meridians. So it's goes all over the body, actually. And because it's bitter and cold, it clears heat. And these terms that I'm going to say, and you see before you in the slide, these are Chinese diagnostic terms that sound kind of weird, but if, they have real life, evidence in them. And so this is why the herb does what it does. And so it clears heat, it purges fire, which in Western can be considered for fevers, skin infections, sepsis, things like that. It resolves dampness, which we would call edema, and it also removes heat toxicity, which can also result in, very infected sores. Okay, so, and it does that internally. We don't ground this up and put it on an infected part of the skin. It does it internally. So obviously it relieves constipation. And this is what I think is so interesting, that it was the leading herb thing traded on the Silk Road. So I guess everybody was really suffering from certain problems all along the Silk Road. It's used for infected sores on the skin. And again, there's internally jaundice, amenorrhea, any type of abdominal distension, pain, blood in the stools, specifically from hemorrhoids. People who are vomiting blood, nosebleeds with constipation, painful eyes. They call them fire toxin stores. So it does all kinds of things. But please do not use this if you're pregnant, because it's very downward draining. It can cause a miscarriage. So you need to be very careful with this if you're pregnant, especially if you live in states that are reinstating laws from 1864. So you or your herbalist don't go to jail. Now, there's a lot of promising modern research. And if you do a search on this, particularly in something like PubMed, there's tons of articles on it, but they're all mostly from Chinese researchers. But the results are very promising. And I'm not saying the Chinese researchers aren't good, they are. But a lot of times Western scientists and pharmaceutical companies, they're not as trusting of these types of research. So I'm just saying that. I'm not saying I believe or don't believe, et cetera, but the most of the papers, particularly from China, are done in the lab, which means they're growing different types of cancer cells and they're squirting Huang tea on the cells and watching what happens. And so what they're finding is that it really stops the growth. So they've done really interesting studies for oral cancer, human oral cancer, breast cancer, and colon cancer. And basically it seems to turn off the mechanism that proliferates cancer cells. And so we can give the term anti-cancer, anti-metastatic, which means stop the spread of cancer. It also protects against radiation. And it's an estrogen receptor modulating. And a lot of breast cancers are turned on by estrogen. So this is probably why it's so good at preventing the spread of breast cancer. Now, this is another slide from my go-to favorite, Science Direct. And these are the chemical diagrams for bioactive compounds in room palmatum or dahuang. And these are responsible for the antimicrobial activities. And there are 5 HAQs. And that's the shortened term for hydroxyanthraquinones. And there's a wonderful word for your new Scrabble to get rid of all kinds of letters. And they're called aloe imodin. Another one is called rain imodin, chrysophanol, and physkion, which if you're writing any type of science fiction fantasy, I think some of those words would be really cool. So there you go. And that's what you'll find when you look in these articles on PubMed. Now, there are lots of cautions with this. You just never need to use this when you're pregnant. Never, never, never. It's a stimulating laxative, and it's also very high in oxalates. And oxalates are those chemicals that we find in herbs like comfrey. And these are the ones that send physicians and pharmacists into hysterics because they can be harmful to people with liver problems. So if you have cirrhosis or have suffered from hepatitis, things like that, this herb can, in high doses, be not so good for you. It's also has a warning because it's such a strong purgative laxative. People with certain eating disorders and mental problems, this can become addictive. So if you are suffering from anorexia or bulimia and you like to purge yourself, this can become very addictive and can become dangerous. It's also not a good idea to take this with certain medications. And again, this is where you need to coordinate your treatments with your caregivers. And supplements such as melatonin are contraindicated with Dahuang. Also with all sorts of heart medications, again, talk to your pharmacist. And if you are suffering any type of immune disorder, particularly if you've had an organ transplant and you're on cyclosporine, this will not do good things for you or your drugs or your problems. So don't mix this with that. Now, Da Huang, like most other herbs in traditional Chinese medicine, is really, you really need to take this in formula. It's really rarely used by itself. Now, one of my favorite formulas, when you are getting licensed as an acupuncturist, you have to memorize all these formulas and all the herbs and the contraindications and the modifications. And you have to memorize the pinyin on these herbs. And there's just, it's really amazing. So anyways, you try and remember things about these things, especially if you don't speak Chinese. And my favorite formula with Da Huang in it is Da Cheng Qi Tang, which translated is major order the qi decoction. Decoction is tong. It's also a word for tea. And the way I could remember it, because it helps relieve constipation, was you pulled the cheng, the chain on the toilet. And this is how I remembered it was good for constipation. So if you have cancer and you would like to try this herb, I really highly suggest you work with a licensed acupuncturist and Chinese herbalist and get a good Chinese diagnosis and see if this herb is good for you, because it may be a really awesome herb for you, and it also might aggravate your condition. So you need to get some good info. Now, I have never grown this herb, but I've seen it in various herb gardens. And there's a beautiful Chinese herb garden at the Berkeley Botanical Garden in the Bay Area of California. And this is at UC Berkeley. And with the large and influential Chinese population in the San Francisco region, leaders in the community donated this garden to UC Berkeley. So if you're in the Bay Area, you really should get a look at this amazing garden. I have a link in the program notes for an incredible book on the subject. It's The Chinese Medicinal Herb Farm by Peg Schaefer. And according to her, the optimal growing conditions for this plant are well-drained soil that is rich in organic matter. And I don't know very many plants that don't do well in that. This plant requires good sunlight, but it also can tolerate partial shade. It really likes a cool, moist climate. Now, in the program notes, there's a lovely website I found on how to grow Da Huang. And it's an app. So for you app people, it's called Greg, which I think is really funny. But this is a really nice website as well as app. I've also got a link on buying seeds. So as you can see, this plant is not only quite beautiful, it's been in use for at least 2,000 years in traditional Chinese medicine and has many qualities and constituents that may be quite useful for cancer control. And again, please, if you're dealing with cancer, make sure to get several opinions. And if you do want to use natural methods, find an integrative cancer clinic where your oncologist and other members of the team can give you the best information and coordinate your treatments and support you for the best possible outcomes. And if you do want to use Essiac supplements, they're widely available online and through health food stores. And the Canadian company that I have a link in the program notes is probably one of your best sources. So this is Stephanie Georgiev saying thank you so much for spending your valuable time with me. Make sure to check out the links in the program notes. And until next time, be well.